The following is a Barrett Sports Media production. We do the digging, so you don't have to.
We've got breaking news.
Breaking news.
Breaking news.
Bringing you the biggest stories from the industry you care about. This is the Media Noise Podcast.
Well, let's hear it.
Now, here's your host, Demetri Ravanos.
I am not going to do a monologue at the top of today's show. This entire show is going to be about the late Vin Scully. I feel like maybe later on next week, maybe I'll write a second column or something like that. But I wanted to bring on Andy Masur, who wrote a beautiful eulogy for the late voice of the Dodgers for the site. And he and I went pretty long in recording, so I'm skipping the monologue. We will get straight to Andy Masur as he and I discuss the legacy of one Vincent Edward Scully. Well, I don't quite know how to characterize this episode, because while I don't think it is fair to call this a eulogy, it is going to be far more celebratory than that. It's also not a celebration, right? Like, it's not, you can't really call it a celebration when, let's take sports out of it for a second. Andy Masur is with me this week. Just from a broadcasting point of view, we lost an icon in Vin Scully. I mean, between the voice, and we're going to get into some stuff on the voice here in just a second, but the storytelling, the fact that there were times when he was bigger than the team. I mean, it's really hard to put into context what Vin Scully was in this business.
Top of the mountain. I mean, there's nobody even close. I mean, you need binoculars to see him. That's how far away everybody else is. Even the best of the best don't add up to him. I mean, you mentioned the storytelling, and a lot of people don't realize also that he worked alone for the better part of the last 15 years. So if there was something going on in the field, there was one time I remember when I was in San Diego, Padres and the Dodgers early in the game, a bench clearing brawl. And Vin doesn't have anybody to bounce anything off of. He has only the replay and his own knowledge and his own way of doing things. I mean, you could see Matt Kemp was mouthing a bad word.
Right.
And all Vin would say is fertilizer. He's saying that's fertilizer. I mean, who thinks of that kind of stuff? I mean,
right.
This is
the same guy. This is the same guy that, I mean, gosh, you talk about the last 15 years working alone. That's why you learn to tell the story of Madison Bumgarner, murdering a snake. Why you learn to tell the story of Johnny Gomes somehow avoiding being eaten by a wolf. I mean, to watch these things, and everybody's been resharing these videos the last few days, to watch these things so casually worked in, and the count never forgotten, what is happening on the field, never forgotten. It is like a far more fun and celebratory version of and that's a long fly ball from Castellanos. You know what I mean? I mean, it is so never lose sight of why you're there, but also never lose sight of what makes this good, and that is the ability to be a human being in the booth.
Yeah, and you mentioned sometimes he was bigger than the team, but he never thought he was bigger than any game. I mean, you could tell him because he called 3 perfect games and a bunch of no-hitters, and it was always left to the fans because he had this innate ability to know when to lay out, and he did it often. And there were certain things and certain ways that he would broadcast moments that I got to admit, I when I called the Lucas Giolito no-hitter in August of 2020, I mentioned the date because Vin mentioned the time of a Sandy Koufax no-hitter in 1965. And I wanted to have a little piece of, Vin in that call because he's Vin, I mean, it's the ability he had to understand and feel the game itself is unparalleled because, there's a lot of guys and myself included, you'll start a story with 2 outs, or you'll start a story with it's a double play with 1 out and you're hung out to dry. But he knew how to get out. He knew how to get in. He knew how to get out. And he knew never to allow the game to get so far out of hand that you didn't know what was going on. You can't even put into words what this guy meant to broadcasting, what he meant to the Dodgers, both Brooklyn and Los Angeles, and what he meant to Major League Baseball. This is a guy that, if you didn't know anything about baseball, you didn't know anything about any of the games, You knew Vin Scully. I guarantee you people knew Vin Scully, and that's the fact.
So I was going to bring this up when we start to talk about his voice, but I think it's worth bringing up now because you're right. If you didn't know baseball, you knew Vin Scully. Harry Shearer, the actor, he's a huge baseball fan, right? And we'll always acknowledge that I think he's a huge Dodgers fan, if I remember right. But he would do the Vin Scully voice anytime there was a Simpsons episode that took you to a baseball stadium. He was always doing the Vin Scully impression. The famous line is, "And here come the pretzels." That was, his famous Vin Scully impersonation line. But that is one of those moments where, I think if you're a college football fan and you think about announcers, maybe you think Keith Jackson voice. Maybe different sports, you think different voices, but I think when most of us imagine an announcer in our head, I think it's Vin's voice. I think Vin's voice is a version of iconic that goes beyond baseball, right? Like it's iconic for Los Angeles. Remember, he did the VO on the tribute at Kobe Bryant and his daughter's funeral.
Yep. He did so many of those things too, because back when he was doing World Series and NLCS and ALCS, for NBC, he did that famous intro to Wrigley Field before Game 1 of the 1989 National League Championship Series, Cubs and the Giants. You're right. I mean, he was the voice of baseball, and there's no real doubting it because, there's a lot of great announcers out there. I think John Miller is one of the best to ever lace him up. Howie Rose out there in New York as well. Pat Hughes in Chicago. I mean, these are guys that have been at it a long time and are at the top of their game and are very, very good. But I guarantee you, each one of those three will admit that they've never gotten to the level that Vin Scully got.
Right.
Because, first of all, think about 67 years. 60s, I mean, coast to coast with the Brooklyn Dodgers, with the LA. He was the last link, basically, to the Brooklyn Dodgers when he retired in 2016. He called games with Jackie Robinson in them, for goodness sakes. That was his first lineup. Had Pee Wee Reese leading off. I mean, he has seen it all from Drysdale to Colfax to Newcomb to every guy in between. He called some great moments. He called not only baseball. I mean, the guy called tennis and golf and football. I mean, I remember growing up as a Bears fan on CBS, he would call a couple of Bears games. A big one, as a matter of fact, when they beat the Giants to get the wild card.
He called the Montana to Dwight.
Dwight Clark.
Dwight Clark.
The catch. Yeah, the catch in San Francisco against the Cowboys. And he is that guy. If you think about a tone that baseball should have.
Yes.
And I've talked about this in some articles that I've written for you guys. And there's a certain tone that a baseball game needs to have. It's down home. It's folksy. It's trusting.
Yeah.
And I wrote that in the piece because I really feel like there's a lot of people out there right now that have a hole in their heart. They never met the man. But listening to him, watching him, he seemingly cared about each and every one of the people that he was broadcasting a game to. I mean, when he retired, I needed you more than you needed me. Poppycock.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. I mean, stop being so darn modest.
It's funny you say that, like that idea of there is this hole in our hearts for this guy we've never met, because it's very similar to how I felt when we found out that Robin Williams committed suicide. I mean, like I am going to be 41 next month, and like, that stretch of from Hook to Aladdin, right? Hook, Mrs. Doubtfire, Aladdin. Like that was the prime of my early teen years. And so to think someone like that brought you that much joy is in that much pain is hard to stomach. I think in the case of Vin, what struck me on Sunday is he was in 94. Like, we can't be surprised by this. Or, I'm sorry, not on Sunday, on Tuesday. You can't be surprised by this. But at the same time, just like Bill Russell on Sunday, like those two guys just felt immortal. And maybe part of it was the fact that they were not only around for so long, but around and, I mean, forgive the term. The term is going to be very, it's going to seem very rude, but around and functional, right? Like Bill Russell could still tell stories. Vin Scully only retired, 6 years ago? 6 years ago?
6 years ago, yeah.
From calling games. I mean, it just gave this air, first of Bill and then of Vin here in this last week of, oh, this does happen to all of us at some point.
Yeah. And the thing is, I've told people this too that have asked me about Vin and working until he was in his late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain guys that work into their mid 70s, late 70s, that you can tell, lost a little zip from the fastball.
Yep.
I mean, and they'll probably be the first to tell you that's happening. Vin still had that four-seamer that was going to bust you inside and break your bat. I mean, because this guy had it all, and he knew how to pace himself, which is the biggest thing in a baseball game, whether you're doing it on TV or radio. You never know how long the game is going to go. You don't want to blow all your good stuff in the beginning. You kind of need to have a pace to it. And he personified that pace because it was, again, an easy flowing broadcast. But when it needed to be serious, it was serious. When it needed to be exciting, it was exciting.
Right.
When he could goof around a little bit, he goofed around a little bit. I mean, people find that hard to believe, but go back and look at some of the YouTube clips. He was having a good time, even by himself. He had his trusty man Boyd right by his side most of the time in a TV booth, and Boyd did a lot of work, a lot of prep work, and got Vin ready to go, and really kind of metered that booth a little bit when people wanted to hang out there and wanted to meet him and wanted to see him. Vin was never one who wanted to say no. So, right. Boyd had to do it every once in a while, unfortunately for him. But, like you said, I mean, he did not lose anything off the fastball. He didn't lose any zip off it whatsoever. And, a testament to the man and how modest he was is when 2017 rolls around, the year after he retires, the Dodgers go back to the World Series. And there's a petition started by Dodgers fans that want him to come in and call the World Series rather than Joe Buck. Joe Buck, to his credit, was on board and really wanted Vin to come in. And Vin's like, no, you guys are doing a great job. You don't need me. I've called enough of these.
Yeah.
And, that just is he's not a limelight. He wasn't a limelight seeker. He just wanted to go in there and do what he did and do what he loved to do.
It's all right. So you've been the voice of 2 major league teams and part of 3 teams broadcast. So I have that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think I have to tell someone like you with your experience, there will never be another Vin Scully. But I did want to share this story with you because like there literally may never be another Vin Scully. I was talking to a young guy. He's calling games for an unaffiliated minor league team right now. And he was asking me about making that transition from just doing play-by-play to play-by-play in a show. And I said, well, part of it is if you're moving to a show, you do have to be able to tell stories. So you should be able to do that. Like you're getting to do that every night in the summertime. And he told me, well, not really. He said, when I got hired, one of the things that the boss told me was that the days of, these were, according to him, his boss's exact words, the days of Vin Scully telling you about his wife's apple pie are over. Just tell me what's happening on the field. And I think I kind of understand what the boss is going for, but that idea of never personalize this at all, that's really sad to think about.
It's a crime. And you know what? There are bosses in the major leagues that have told broadcasters the same thing. Unfortunately, I know firsthand that some of the stories that they're very true and very real, because baseball is one of those sports that has such a connection between the announcer and the fan base.
Right.
It's incredible. I mean, I spent 7 seasons with the Padres in San Diego, which is not a real long time, but I still have people contacting me via Twitter. Hey, I grew up listening to you, and it makes me feel really old, but it's still at the same time, it's nice to hear that, you were that voice of someone's summer. And you have to have fun. You can't sit there for a 9-inning game that's 8-1. Your team's getting pasted. What are you going to do? Ball 1, ball 2. There's a strike. I mean, come on. Who's going to listen to that? I mean, yeah. And you know what? The thing is that Vin taught everybody, I think, is the ability to know when to, kind of go to that shtick and when to, call a game deadpan and serious, because certain situations called for that. But Vin, the mastery of what Vin did, Vin always knew the end of the story.
Right.
I know that sounds stupid, but sometimes, if you don't know where it's ending, you can't end it if you need to end it right away.
Yeah.
Vin had an innate ability that if the inning was coming to an end, God forbid it was a triple play and he started a story, he knew how to get out of it, or he knew how to extend it to the next break.
Right.
And there are not a lot of people that know how to do that. And you're right. It's a lost art. And I think that some people kind of take it to an extreme when they try to tell stories, they try to tell too many stories. They try to tell stories that aren't relevant. They try to tell stories that nobody really cares about. You've got to find interesting things about your players, interesting things. I mean, Jerry Coleman, when he and I worked together and with Ted Leitner, all he would have to do is say, "Hey, Jerry, what'd you do today?" And it was a segment that everybody loved because they loved Jerry because they got to know Jerry over the years. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's a love affair. And I think if you ask anybody that grew up in Brooklyn or anybody that grew up in LA or anybody that grew up a baseball fan, there is something that is going to be missing from this game now forever.
So I do wonder, as someone that has done this job for a number of years, who of the tributes to the man that you saw did you kind of feel like that guy gets what this means?
Michael Kay. I thought he was great, and there's been so many, John Miller, Pat Hughes was talking about that.
I thought Brent Musburger's was pretty short, but I thought if you're talking about like a single sentence, Los Angeles was a baseball town because of Vin Scully was pretty great.
It's the truth. Yeah, no, it's the truth. I mean, few words need to, you don't really need to say a lot of words to kind of express feelings. Unfortunately, I wrote an entire column about it, but I had a little trouble expressing myself. But yeah, I mean, there's so many people that are in such deference to him. But the one thing that there's always one thing that all these broadcasters kind of have in common. I saw Don Orsillo also had something he posted where he was an intern with a picture next to Vin. And now he was 3 years or 4 years ago as a Padres announcer sitting next to him, talking about how he called Vin for advice about when he left Boston about San Diego. He goes, "Go to San Diego. They're going to love you there." I mean, who does that? It's Vin Scully, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
But he was a friend to all of these people. He was a friend. He was a colleague. He never saw himself as the top of the mountain. He always saw himself as one of the guys.
I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if you are aware of Wes Durham, who works for the ACC network. His dad, Woody, was the play-by-play voice of the Tar Heels here in North Carolina forever. He posted this beautiful handwritten note that Vin sent Woody when Woody retired, saying, I know from people here in Southern California what you mean to Tar Heels fans, and you've, earned this retirement, blah, blah, blah. And, Wes wrote in his Twitter message, like, they never met. Like, this was just Vin understanding the responsibility that comes with being the voice of a fan base.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that Vin got it. He got it always. I mean, the beginnings with Red Barber weren't easy for him. I think he learned, from Red that, listen, I need to be kind to people. And not that Red was not kind, but, he was not as friendly to the younger guy that, maybe some of the other broadcasters, may have been. Luckily for me, I mean, I've never had that situation where someone has been, trying to push me down. And I don't know if that was exactly the case, but it didn't sound like the relationship was tremendous. And I think Vin at a young age learned about, what it's like to be one of the guys, be one of the fellas that, one of 30 that are doing this job at this point. And, there's a big responsibility, as you pointed out. There's a big responsibility to the fan base, and there's a big responsibility to each other because it's a fraternity. I mean, everybody's got different styles. No one wants to be, Vin. Yeah. And Vin didn't want to be Howie Rose, and Howie Rose didn't want to be Pat Hughes, and Pat Hughes didn't want to be John Miller. It's hard enough to be the second, the first you, then the second somebody else, is what I tell my broadcasting students all the time as well. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, Vin wanted to make it seem, and not just seem, but he really did feel that he was he would walk into the visiting booth or the home booth all the time. Hey, what's going on with your ball club? And he would make it known that he wanted to know, and who's not going to talk to Vin about their team? You know what I mean?
All right, a big thank you to Andy Mazur, and condolences not just to the family of Vin Scully, but baseball fans everywhere, fellow broadcasters. Like, this is this is on the level of a John Madden. This is the voice of the sport for a generation of people. And, I guess, in Vin's case, multiple generations of people, right? And I'll go back to what I said earlier. To lose him in the same week as Bill Russell, it just doesn't feel believable.
This concludes our broadcast day.
Thanks for listening to the Media Noise Podcast with Demetri Ravanos. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And check back soon for new episodes. To stay up to date on the latest sports media happenings, visit barrettsportsmedia.com.